Hey everyone, Stephen here. Welcome to What Matters. In this episode, I sit down with the founder and president of the Power of Peace Project, Kit Cummings, and we talk about his organization. Now, Kit goes all around the world to the world's most dangerous prisons and actually promotes movements of peace within the prisons. So he's actually sitting down with the world's most dangerous people and convincing them that living peaceful lives is in their best interest. So Kit is actually inspired by figures like MLK, Nelson Mandela, and Gandhi, and we talk about their teachings and how they can apply to the world today. And I shoot Kit some questions that I haven't heard him asked in other interviews, so I think this makes for a pretty interesting interview. I hope you enjoy. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube and like and follow on Facebook, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platforms like iTunes and Google Play. I'm Stephen Brantley, and this is What Matters. All right, Kit, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So to start off with, give me a little bit about what the Power of Peace Project is and what your role is in that organization.
Okay, Power and Peace Project is a 501c3, but we also have an S Corp, the Power Peace Productions, and they both support each other. I founded it in 2010, and it began as a prison work where I was doing programming inside of prisons, and now it's evolved into a community project, especially teen prevention, where I was doing about the last 10 years, I was doing intervention programs in maximum security prisons, working with rival gang intervention, doing some pretty crazy stuff. And then it's evolved into primarily what I do now is working with teens and try to keep people from, getting hurt, hurting themselves, getting on a dangerous path. And really the foundation of it, and really what I think gets and keeps young people's attention, is how it started in these crazy prisons and this wild journey over the past decade.
I got you. Well, what led you to where you are today? Give me, where'd you grow up, go to school, and all of that? I know you have an inspirational story, so I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I'm a local guy in the Atlanta area. And so I grew up right here in Marietta, Georgia, and went to school at Walton High School, and then went on, played a little ball down at Georgia Southern, finished up at UGA, and graduated in 1989 with a marketing degree from the Terry School of Business.
Okay.
After I got out, I got into the entertainment business for a minute and into the music business, and thought I was going to be doing that, and then had a significant life change right about 25. And I had, I guess, what you would call a spiritual awakening. And I was never a religious guy. I mean, I was the least likely guy, to tell you the truth, to be a preacher, but that's what I chose at 25. Went into the full-time ministry, was ordained 3 years after that, and then spent from 25 to 40 building churches, planting churches, leading churches, and in my 30s, pretty big churches. And at the age of 40, really went through a spiritual burnout and walked away from a couple thousand people, no more gas in the tank. And then went through what I call a wilderness experience, turned 40 and kind of freaked out for a minute, and ended up going through some major life changes again. Was remarried in 2006, and I think my son. I have son Cole, about to graduate University of Georgia. I've got a daughter Lena, who right now is living out on the West Coast for a minute, getting ready to come back here. And then after stumbling through about 5 years of doing really jobs that I hated, things that I wasn't put on the planet to do, but basically just hustling and supporting my family. In 2008, went and started working with a kid. Well, he wasn't a kid anymore, but working with a young man that I knew when he was a kid, and he happened to be locked up. And I'm sure your listeners have heard of MS-13.
Mm-hmm.
He had gotten jumped in at the age of 14. This is about when he was 25, and we reconnected, and he was looking at a potential death penalty murder case. And he had become, an MS-13 leader, and he and I knew each other from back in the day. And so I started working with him, and it changed my life. And that kind of changed my direction. And over the past decade, leads me to where we are today.
Okay, so you mentioned that you had a few burnouts over time. Your first one, I believe you were around 25. What led to that?
So, yeah, I've had two significant burnouts, one at 25, one at 40. And so, I come from uh, a long line of drinkers. It's kind of a big deal in my family line, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So, I grew up in a house where that was an issue. I lost my dad to addiction when I was in college at UGA. And I was always an athlete, a decent student, but I was always pretty wild and crazy and just, following that lifestyle. But sports kind of got me through, kept me out of any big trouble. But I was a knucklehead. I got arrested multiple times. It was crazy, fighting and partying and chasing girls and tearing stuff up was really what I was into. And so at the age of, 24, 25, the reason I was worn out is because I kept partying harder and harder. And then I got into this industry where that was the norm. You entertain people. And so, finally it was not sustainable, and I wanted a life change. And that's when I met a guy that changed my life and studied a book with me and opened my eyes, and that set me on a new course. But after 15 years of doing that, I found myself in the same place. I mean, I was burnt out spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first one was more of a life burnout. I was probably, it was going to be a terrible ending to my story. And then, 20 years later, 15 years later, whatever it was, I found myself kind of in the same spot, just, different circumstances, but thirsty again. And that led to, the second major awakening in my life.
I got you. All right, so you met with this you came across this guy that you had known when you were younger, and and he's in prison now. Give me the story there.
Yeah. I was leading a large church in Gwinnett.
Hmm.
And, I was really, it's kind of, my first book is about this. I called it Unshackled, Diary of a Prodigal Son. And I published that one in 2010, and I've published a few more since then. But that was the first one. I told the story, the way I explain it is the drunken fallen preacher that finds his way home through gangsters and convicts. It's kind of the story. But there was a kid, and he used to wait in line to come talk to me, when I would preach. And we met at the Gwinnett Civic Center, great big church. And just a great young kid, 12, 13, he'd wait in line, come up, and always have something cool to say, Mr. Kid, Mr. Kid. And, I kind of became a big brother to him. And we'd hang out, and he was getting in a little bit of trouble, but just he was a good kid. And then I moved off to Athens to lead another church, and I lost connection with him. And it was 10 years later that his mom, this is right after I got on Facebook. I mean, this was like, Facebook wasn't that old. This was like 2008, I guess.
Hmm.
She found me, his mom found me, and asked me if I could go, visit Luis. And I said, yeah, where's he at? I was excited. I want to find out, how's he doing? And he had gotten into this gang, and that was back when not a lot of people knew about MS-13. Now a lot of people do, because it's, they're pretty much the most dangerous gang in the country, and FBI has a whole division devoted to dismantling them. And so in like 2007, 8, there was a big FBI sting in Atlanta, and they rounded up 26 MS-13 gang leaders, and my guy was in the center of it. He was the only legal in the whole group, and so he became like the star witness of the case. And they ended up flipping him. And when they did, he had a bullseye on him. MS-13 crossed him out, and I was close to him at this point, and so it got kind of crazy because we were worried they might come after me. They do that a lot, and I was standing up for him in the courtroom. I was there visiting every week. I was studying with him through the class and trying to help my friend. And so it got kind of crazy there. And then he ended up.
You actually had to have security guards hired.
Yeah, it kind of had patrol cars in the cul-de-sac, that kind of thing, which was kind of hard on my wife. How do you explain that one? Sorry, babe. And yeah, having to kind of look over your back all the time, and it was a wild time. But I was just devoted to helping this kid. I just cared about him. So it wasn't like I made a decision. Hey, I'm gonna go start working with dangerous gangsters. It was just I wanted to go see a friend, and that's how I got into it. And so shortly after that, he ended up getting sentenced. He's doing 20 federal now. He's up in Pennsylvania somewhere, and but anyway, the groundwork had been laid. I was fascinated with this work, and I had gotten an inside glimpse because for 2 years I taught him about life, and how to change. He taught me about the gang life and everything from the inside. I mean, nobody gets the kind of information that I got, and just about that whole world. Um, and it changed me. So not too long after that, I started doing a lot of corporate motivational stuff. And somebody invited me into a prison in 2009, and my life changed again. And it just happened to be Georgia's most violent, dangerous maximum security prison. There was a gang war going on. I didn't know any of that. I just knew I wanted to go inside and see if I could find some more guys like Luis. And that's when the thing just took off.
Okay. So throughout your time, before you really started the organization, you had read the biographies of MLK and Gandhi and Mandela and some other big figures like that, and that ended up kind of inspiring where you would eventually go and where you would take this movement. How did those figures influence you?
Great question. When I was at UGA, I stumbled across a biography of Dr. King, and it's called Let the Trumpet Sound, which is a great book. And I just was drawn to him. And so for 25 years, I followed him one way or another. And then if you study King, you got to study Gandhi because we wouldn't have a king without Gandhi. And then if you study those two, you're naturally led to Mandela because basically they're all in their own way teaching the same nonviolent principles. And Mandela was able to bring South Africa together after apartheid using those principles. Gandhi was able to liberate India from English, colonialism using the principles that he developed in South Africa. And then Dr. King, of course, led the struggle until they had to kill him. And all three of those men, Mandela is the only one that lived, a long life, but 27 years he was locked up.
Mm-hmm.
Became a danger, to the establishment. Dr. King obviously was a danger, and they thought they silenced him, but they didn't, because people like me still out preaching his words. And then Gandhi, of course, they killed him. And so these peacemakers that paid the ultimate price, they became my, role models. And I was fascinated before we ever started this. So when I was at Hays State Prison, which is where the whole thing was born, I'd started a little Bible study in the cafeteria, and 3 or 4 guys came, and I kept going every Friday. Every Friday I'd go to this prison. I didn't know what it was really at that point. And before long, we filled up that cafeteria, and they asked me to bring it down the hill to the general population, which I did. And we filled up visitation rooms. So now there was a buzz around the yard about this new thing. Well, the deputy warden came to me and she said, "Can you develop a program that will a non-religious program that you can engage my negative leaders?" And I said, "Like who?" And she's like, "My gang leaders. We can't get them to get engaged." And I'm talking there was weekly stabbings, daily fights. At one point, there was 5 bodies in 6 weeks. I mean, it was crazy. It was gangland stuff, And so anyway, I said, yeah, I've got something I could do. And so they let me go to one of the dorms, and which they weren't letting anybody go inside the dorms, but they let me. And so I went in there and I got a small group of guys, and I started teaching them what I call attitude science. And it's just some things that I developed over the years that I would teach in corporate, or I teach at schools. And so I started working with these convicts, and man, they came alive. And it was just, I could have easily had this thought and not acted on it, and I have no idea what I'd be doing today. It was one of those kind of things. So, listeners, when you get that nudge, make a move, because sometimes that thing is a universal thought that might be only for you, and if you don't jump on it, somebody else will. And I had this life-changing idea, and at the time, it didn't seem like a big deal, but I was like, man, we ought to try, a special little experiment at Hays around Dr. King's birthday. And I had the idea when I was speaking up at Philadelphia at a big conference. And after I got off the stage, I was like, I just had this idea. I saw Dr. King's face. And so I went back, pitched it to the warden. He shot it down. He said, absolutely not. It's too dangerous up here to do something like that. And I'm like, that's the whole stinking point. It's because it's so dangerous. You got to do something like this. Well, he wouldn't let me do it. And so I kind of did it on the down low, to tell you the truth. I went into the dorm, got my guys together and said, look, we're going to do this, but you can't tell anybody because, I'm going to get in trouble if you let this out. Well, that didn't work because they got fired up about it. They signed a pledge. I created this little book for them based on King, Gandhi, Mandela quotes, daily action challenges, Tuesdays at 4. We'd get there, chop it up. And they went out and started telling everybody. And they started bringing me gang leaders, gangsters in the yard. I mean, people was coming to me and wanting to be a part of this little 40 days of peace. And before long, it got back to the warden. I kind of almost got in trouble, but it had already started. And so he let me manage it. And so like in no time, all of a sudden, I'm meeting with the heavy gang leaders in the heaviest prison in the state, talking about how can we bring peace to that prison, because it was just getting crazy.
Yeah.
And that summertime, when it was 100 degrees in the dorms, the most violent time of the year, they had just taken away cigarettes. So, I mean, violence was up because when it's hot, guys get edgy. They don't got their tobacco. It was crazy. Peace came to that prison for like this magical season. And that prison won Institution of the Year that year in 2011. That's what put me on the map. But they did all the hard work. I just inspired them and would go in there and encourage them. And they did this monumental, heroic work. And I got all the credit. And so soon after that, I started doing prison tours, and I'd do 12, 15 prisons in a state. I mean, 3 shows a day, 2-hour shows. It was just crazy. I was getting in front of thousands of convicts. And I was telling them the story of Hay State Prison. And the more I spoke, the more I got invited. And so I started doing just more and more and more prisons. And then I did prisons, in Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe. I mean, it was just nuts. So it all started with that challenge around Dr. King's birthday.
Wow. So I want to go back to the kind of the core principle behind this. So the focus on peace, what is the real value behind it? I know it seems like a silly question, but I really want to get to the roots of why we should be so focused on this principle.
Yeah.
Why peace? What's so valuable behind peace? And are you a pacifist? Do you advocate nonviolence on all fronts?
Yeah, yeah, great questions. The way that I got it to work on the inside, behind the wire, is, everybody does things for their own reasons. And so, and not necessarily in a bad way. It's what's in it for me. If you're
Mhm.
trying to sell something, if you're trying to persuade, if you're trying to get somebody to believe deeply, it's like you got to help them see, what is in it for you. And so I just took them where they were at, and I said, look, here were the questions. I'd say, raise your hand if you want to do hard time. No, but I asked this question all over the world, and nobody wants to do hard time. And whether that's in a prison or in your cubicle or in your neighborhood, nobody wants to do hard time in life. Life sucks.
Right.
Life is hard. I don't want that. Everybody wants easy time if possible, especially if you're in a prison. And then I would ask them, how many of y'all want to go home? Every hand in the room. How many of y'all want to go home yesterday? All of them. I'm like, all right. How many of y'all want your sons, little brothers, grandsons to come here? None of them. That's sacred. And then I'd say, okay, do you know when something's about to happen? And do you have the power to stop it if you want to? And they would raise their hand high and say, yep, we run this place. I'm like, all right, here's what's in it for you. If you don't want to do hard time and you can do easy time, you choose easy time. If you want to go home yesterday rather than 20 years from now, you choose yesterday. If you don't want your family to come here, if you want to go be reunited, you'd obviously do that. So if you guys are doing dirt, and this was always the moment, a bunch of convicts I'm just getting to know in a tough prison somewhere, I'd say, if you say all that and then you're out there doing dirt and causing trouble and acting violently, then you're full of beep, but I would say the beep, and just blow their minds because they're not used to being, talked to in a way that was just straight.
Yeah.
And they had to agree. and I got a level of respect and credibility because I was coming to them, in a very, very real way and challenging them as men. Well, in the free world, which is what they call it, I don't care if it's a church, a corporate gig, if it's working with kids, when peace goes up, everything flourishes. Programs, education, treatment, job search, school, everything works where there's less and less conflict. Where conflict goes up, those things are taken away.
Yeah.
In schools where there's a lot of violence, kids can't learn. In the workplace where there's all kind of negativity and hatred and gossip and slander, you can't earn. I mean, that's a dysfunctional community on a team. If there's, concord, there's not peace and unity, team can't win. And so what's in it for you is where there is peace in your life will flourish. Things will grow, whether it's a relationship, a family, a church, a business, an athletic team, a prison. And so when guys started to see that, man, this is what's in it for me is a better quality of life. So if I have to live here, at least it doesn't have to be hell. I mean, if we work together and we started seeing Crips and Bloods working together, it was crazy.
Wow.
And even more dramatically, we saw black militant Muslim sects working with white Aryan Brotherhood sects. That's like unheard of. I've never seen anything like it. And I got to witness it, not just once, but over and over and over. And so if you help somebody see what they can have and help them admit that if they could have it, if they could, if they could get it, they would choose it, then you just got to give them the tools and swallow your pride, work with the guy on the other side of that table, and create what you say you want. Now, if you're not willing to do that, then we got to call, I'm going to say BS on you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so I think that works for everybody on the planet. We're born for peace. A little baby doesn't, is not born into the world racist. They learn it. Little babies aren't born hateful or bigots. They learn it. And so if we can learn it, we can unlearn it and go back to what our true nature is, which is peace.
Yeah. Well, I like the way that you frame that because I work for a nonprofit and I really believe in pointing out the whenever I want to present something to people, potential donors or whatever, or try to convince them of an idea. I point out the intrinsic value behind something. It'll really make you feel good because
Yeah.
you're helping others. But I also want to point out the selfish motivations behind it.
Sure.
And that's really cool that with peaceful environments, there's more stability and everything prospers with more stability.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's an awesome message. Or more recently, you've worked with in Tijuana,
Mm.
and you actually had to talk to a drug lord and ask for his protection.
You've done your homework, young man.
Oh man, yeah, I do my research.
I'm impressed. Yeah, it was crazy. A guy reached out to me. I didn't know. I had heard of him. He kind of heard of me. We had never met, but he's on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast, and I don't know. We had been at a conference maybe 2 or 3 times. And anyway, somebody gave him one of my books. I wrote a book called Peace Behind the Wire, a Nonviolent Resolution. It's about this decade-long journey, of peace around the world and all these crazy places. And he read it and he was moved to reach out to me. So he sent me a Facebook message. I responded. We were on the phone, and then we spent an hour on the phone, just like, oh my gosh, you're doing that? That's what I'm doing. He's like, man, you're doing that? That's what I'm doing. And we found out that we were both kind of trying to do the same things, just in different ways on different coasts. So within a month, I'm flying out there to meet with him. And he was working across the border. He lived in San Diego, still does. And he was doing some cutting edge stuff in Tijuana. And he's working with these kids on the streets that literally live in cartel hell. Tijuana is a place right now that tourists don't go. Really nobody looks like me down there. It's just a dangerous city because, once El Chapo was finally rounded up for good, there was a vacuum and there was a cartel war that went on, and it's really still going on for territory because that's the busiest border crossing in the world, and there's all these tunnels that go under it, and that's where a lot of people and drugs and all kind of stuff are smuggled into America. And so I wanted to see it. And so I went there and we started working with the kids. Well, a lot of the kids had dads that were in prison or had uncles or granddads, whatever. And there was this big prison, still is, in Tijuana called La Mesa, one of the toughest prisons in uh, northern Mexico. And it's got 5,000 men in it. They're packed in cells, 15 to 20 at a time, one cell, not enough bed space for everybody. And that's what they do life. They do their life in that cell with those men. And, it's a pretty violent place. It's cartels run it. And 2008, it made international news because 5,000 men took the prison by force and held it for 30 days,
Wow.
set it on fire. I mean, it was wild. And then finally, the federales came in. They brought tanks in. They had to take it over. It's like a siege. I mean, it's crazy.
And you
And
thought it was a great idea to go there.
I was pretty excited. I'm weird like that, though, because I mean, really, the most fascinating, powerful, life changing things that have ever happened to me have happened behind that razor wire. So the more intense, I figured, the more powerful
Yeah.
the thing I'm going to witness. And so, sure enough, it was really one of the most powerful experiences of my life because we got to go in there and they wanted me to do this program. So I took one of my books and I had it translated into Spanish, and we went in there and we tried it. And so they gave us 50 men out of one of the most dangerous blocks. They didn't know us. I don't speak Spanish. I had an interpreter and named Jesus. So that was kind of interesting. Jesus was my interpreter. And then I got my buddy Jeff, who he had never been in a prison before. And we did what's called 40 days to freedom. And so we spent 2 days with them. They signed the pledge, just like the brothers in the beginning did. This was last year, maybe at the end, early that. And it was unbelievable the way that they changed and how valuable. And this is what I've seen in prisons all over is once they taste a little bit of peace and they see what life could be like, because a lot of them bought the lie that, life has got to be like this because you're in a prison and there's certain things that have to happen in prison. Well, we say, bullcrap. It doesn't have to be like that. You guys can change it. I mean, if you really, really want to, and here's the way you would do it. And they protect it. I mean, it's like once they get a taste of it, they do not want to lose it. And I mean, they'll go a long way to police themselves to make sure that nobody screws up this piece. And so we saw, tough cartel guys, rival cartels that were coming together, 40 days at a time. And we always have a big graduation at the end. And it was unbelievable. We were laughing and playing and singing and dancing with these guys that the whole world thinks are, well, I mean, they are dangerous guys, but not anymore, or at least not when they were around us.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was wild. That was a game changer because it really showed me that if it can happen there, it can literally happen anywhere. I mean, I've had crazy thoughts like, some of the craziest places in the world. I can't wait to see what's next because I want to try it, in the next place.
Yeah. And where are some of the places you've been? I know you've been in the Ukraine,
Hmm.
um, and a few other places. What are some? And you've been all around the world with doing these talks and visiting prisons.
Yep, yep. Yeah, Ukraine was fascinating. I was there right before everything kind of blew up. So right before the Russians came down into Crimea and ended up, Kiev, was on fire for a minute. I had gotten through there right before all that. Beautiful place, and I kind of did a little bit of prison work there. I wasn't able to do the whole program, but got my feet wet a little bit because Eastern European prisons are completely different than
Hmm.
Central American prisons. And Honduras was a game changer. I did 7 prisons there, and those were, you talk about Wild Wild West. They don't wear uniforms, they don't give them food. They just basically throw them all in one huge place and say, hey, work it out. They don't have any guards that go back there. I mean, it's literally the inmates run the asylum, and they treated us with respect. And we did it down in South Africa, which was one of my favorite places in the whole world, working with Zulu warriors down there, and that was pretty wild. Of course, Mexico changed my life, but I've done a little bit here and there in the Philippines and Scandinavia, and different parts of Europe. And right now, there's a little bit of interest in New Zealand and Tanzania, a couple of places that are starting to, kind of nibble a little bit. So I'm really trying to focus more at home, but I want to see where it's going to go next. We got back went to India, and you probably know that my son and daughter went with us to that
Right.
3 months ago. What a fascinating place India is. I mean, just a great place.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures. It really looks amazing.
Yeah, it's wild.
Um, will you tell me? You have 7 steps that you ask everyone to go by to conflict resolution and to start this peacemaking process. What are those steps?
Yeah, so this is the meat of the program, and so everything spins off of this. So I've got several 40-day just programs that are books, and 40 days specifically because it's long enough to break bad habits, create new ones. It's long enough for the brain to start to rewire itself around new information, new patterns, new habits. And so that's the way we do it. It's also not overwhelming for somebody that's in an intense situation or really stuck or, in a place that they can get their mind wrapped around 40 days, more than 40 weeks or 40 months or 40 years. It's a bit overwhelming. And so we bring together rivals. So in high schools, it might be jocks and freaks and nerds and goths and, what I'm saying, the different quote unquote
Right.
gangs, not real gangs, but, the cliques that don't get along in schools, high schools. In prisons, it would be Crips and Bloods and Gangster Disciples and Latin Kings or whatever. Um, in religiously, it would be Christian and Muslim and Jews. It could be legals and illegals. It could be in South Africa, it's 12 tribes along with, Chinese, Indian, Afrikaans. It's, racially, socially, religiously, socioeconomically, gender, all the things that are tearing the world apart and dividing us. These 7 steps are simple and they work, but it takes humility. And so what we do is let's use the Tijuana inmates down there. Is here are the 7. 1, seek first to understand your opponent. Okay, whenever you're going to come into a new encounter, relationship, or even if it's a beef, the way to settle it is I've got to first I'm getting to know you, Stephen. Okay, we don't know each other that well, right?
Hmm.
Um, kind of just meeting, even though we cross paths. Is if I want to build a relationship with you, but let's say that maybe our families don't get along, or maybe you come from a certain part of town and I come from another, and so we're natural kind of rivals. The first step is I know what I think, what I believe, what I know, but I don't have any idea what you think, believe, or know. And so I'm going to seek first to understand you, regardless of if I agree or not. If I'm smart, then I'm going to seek first to understand you. Then doing that, I'm going to find common ground. Once I seek first to understand your life, I'm going to look for commonality. Like, what do Stephen and I share in common? Um, and it can be whatever. I mean, in prisons, I say, hey, let's start with this. You're all wearing the same uniform. I mean, you all got to live here. You all bleed red. Let's just kind of start there and start with what we have in common. And then earnestly seek to understand that other, whatever that other is. And then 3, walk a mile with your adversary before you make a judgment. Okay, so if I seek first to understand Stephen, if I find some common ground with Stephen, both went to UGA, whatever it is. And then if I walk a mile with you and listen, talk, man, what's life? How'd you grow up? Where are your people from? Where'd you go to school? What do you love? What do you hate? Who's your hero? Tell me about the greatest day of your life. What about the toughest time of your life? Good questions. And then I walk with you. Then now I'm going to start to feel you. Okay, so seek first to understand, I start to see you. Common ground, we start to walk together. Now, if I pay attention, I start to feel you. Once I see you and feel you, then we're starting to make progress, and that's what we saw. So there are 7 steps. 4, actively listen and pause before responding. Think about that. You're doing a great job of it. You're asking a question, and then you're listening, and it's not like you're cutting in. You're not trying to interrupt and get it. You're listening, and that's a lost art. In today's world, everybody's trying to shout loud and be heard, and people are not listening. 5 is compassionately communicate and use your influence for peace. So when we do speak, we can choose language and tone like Dr. King did. He was brutally killed by his enemies, but you never saw him lose his temper, not once. They couldn't make him lose his cool. I mean, he was a man's man, huge, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And yet he managed to keep his grace and almost nobility. And so that's what I would challenge them to do is use your words deliberately. And then when you're wrong, quickly admit it and make amends. That's what a real man does. Is it's not weak to say you're sorry, I blew it. And then lastly, treat your enemy with dignity and respect, even when you disagree. So if I take that energy into every interaction, man, I want to know what you think. I want to find commonality. I want to walk with you. I'm going to listen when you talk. I'm going to speak compassionately. Hey, where I see I'm wrong, I'm man enough to admit it. And hey, even if we get done and say, nope, I don't agree with you, you don't agree with me, that's all right. We can still be respectful, go our own ways. And now I don't have an enemy. I've got somebody I just don't agree with. So I think that model could work in Congress. It could work with the Israeli-Palestinian situation. It could work, I mean, where couldn't it work
Yeah.
if we can get two parties to honestly and sincerely work those steps?
So we have this tribalism about us, and I might differ from you a little bit. I think that I don't know if we actually are born peaceful. I think that we just have this innate desire to be tribalistic, but we both agree that we have to break down those things that divide us if we want to, thrive in the future.
Right.
And and we're seeing that in America and across the world, really. But we're definitely seeing it since the 2016 campaign and all the protests in the streets. And I just wish that these 7 principles, these 7 steps could be out there, and that people would follow them. Recently, we've had some protests throughout the United States, and the most recent example is the one that happened in Chicago just a few days ago. Basically, there was actually a police shooting. The suspect was killed in that, and there were protests that erupted immediately after that shooting, and they became violent. And the video just released from the body cam footage, and it shows that the suspect actually had guns on him and had actually reached for those guns before the police fired at him. So so ultimately, all of these protests, these violent protests, were had for no reason at all. That this violence was useless. So, what do you say to protesters that act off of this, this quick response, this instinctuality, without really learning about what's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a very, very relevant one in, the times we live in because, the divide has gotten wider and wider and everybody's on high alert, officers on alert, citizens are on alert. And so, it doesn't take much. It's a spark in a bucket of gasoline, and so now everybody is so ready to march and ready to protest. A lot of times, just give me a reason and it'll get violent. But I think if we, as many have said, if we don't understand our history, we're bound to repeat it. I've studied a lot on the history of nonviolent movements that were effective. Doesn't mean that we've arrived. We haven't. We got a lot of problems, but I think if you look around the world, there's a reason that the world continues to show mad respect to Dr. King and Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Mandela and Mother Teresa and Albert Einstein, Cesar Chavez, the great peacemakers and civil rights leaders of our time. They didn't just march into the fray every time that something popped off. I mean, they spent hours and days and weeks and sometimes months getting ready for a campaign. They're very deliberate. Where would they go? When would they go? Who would go? And how would they handle themselves? They didn't just throw young people into the fray. They had a very, very deliberate way that we'll take Dr. King, for example. First, I mean, whenever there was an issue, and, I tell young people, I know it seems like the whole world is blown up and everything is as bad as it's ever been. But anybody that studies the 60s will find that we're nowhere near where we were then. And that doesn't discount any of the problems we have going on or any of the pain that people on both sides of this issue find themselves in. But, early 60s, we were literally one false move away from nuclear holocaust. We had a president killed. Then we had his brother who was about to become president killed. We had Dr. King killed. We had Malcolm killed. There was the war. Hundreds were being killed every week in the Vietnam War. When Dr. King was killed and assassinated, there were all the major cities in our whole country were on fire, just like we saw Ferguson and Baltimore. Imagine that times 30. The world was literally coming apart. And yet Dr. King was very intentional, very deliberate. He decided when they were going to get arrested and go to jail. It was a deliberate move when his people decided to get arrested. When I say his people, I'm talking about black, white, brown, young, Christian, Muslim, Jew. There were all kinds of people that were marching nonviolently. But to march with Dr. King, you couldn't protest violently. It went against everything that he lived for, taught, and eventually died for. And so, you don't know how to do a peaceful campaign without information. And so the first step is always information gathering. Okay, so when there's an event like Chicago, pump the brakes. Whoever's in charge, you got to make sure you understand what's going on. So there's a whole period of information gathering. And then the second step, according to Dr. King, was self-purification. That means we're not going to march or do whatever the campaign is until we're ready to do it nonviolently. Sometimes that took a short time. Sometimes that took a long time, but he wasn't going to send anybody into a protest that wasn't equipped and prepared. And then the third step was negotiations. Okay, so after you've gathered all your information and after you've purified yourself, meaning that we've got to get ourselves right before we do this thing, now we've got to at least try to negotiate with the other side and see if we can get all the facts, whether it's a shooting or whether it's, whatever it is. And then having gotten all the facts, having gotten your own self ready, and then make sure the other side understands your intentions, give them a chance to respond. And then if all else fails, you're ready to go ahead into direct action. And that meant let's march through the streets. It meant sending students into the counters and being seated in the white only sections. It meant getting on buses and riding across state lines, knowing that those freedom riders were going to get burned and beaten and sometimes even killed in Mississippi and some other places. You see a very, very different method there than what you see today. Today, you think about those steps. Something happens and the word goes out, Twitter, Instagram, the media, whatever news, outlet is on the scene first. No facts. Nobody knows what's happened. People hit the street. They start demanding things without having any information. They certainly haven't prepared themselves for a nonviolent protest. And then as soon as something goes wrong, then things are set on fire, cars are overturned, people are hurt. And so it goes against everything that Dr. King taught, everything that he lived for, everything that he died for. And I think that we can see by the way things are going in this country that, as he said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hatred cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And we're seeing that evidenced in, things are not getting better, they're getting worse. And so I do believe there's a time to march. And I have marched. I marched with 10,000 strong, Black Lives Matter. And I'm not a Black Lives Matter guy. I just wanted to march with them so that I could learn with them, walk a mile with them, listen, compassionately communicate and try to find out, what my brothers and sisters of color are feeling. And I tell people, hey, if you're not willing to go and sit down and communicate with the other side, then don't tell me you're about solutions. Maybe you just want to go turn over a car. Well, that ain't going to help nothing. It's not going to fix anything. So I think it's going back and finding out what the great ones said and what they taught and what they did. And if we imitate that, if people who are suffering are able to, well, I'm not sure in the last segment if we got to this or not, but Mr. Gandhi taught that when you're being treated unfairly, all the way down to violently, he taught his followers to be willing to suffer for their enemies. And if they're willing to do that, which is taking a noble stand for the truth, then everybody that witnesses your mistreatment is going to rally together and rescue you and get behind your cause. But as soon as if somebody does me wrong and I snap back and I hit back and do them wrong, you'll have spectators, but they're not going to be, choosing the side of righteousness. They're just going to take a video and tweet it. And then the, problem gets worse. So, I challenge people, yeah, if it's time to march, great. Do it the way that King taught. Do it the way that Mandela and Gandhi taught, and we can change things.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice, and it sounds really nice. I mean, I would love to see protests going on like that or happening like that because I think the movements are a lot more effective than what's happening now. Whenever let's say, you know, Black Lives Matter is a very loosely organized organization, and whenever a few people that are protesting under that name go out and start riots or something like that, that discredits the entire movement in a lot of people's eyes.
Yeah.
And so if people could just, be calm and actually work with the other side before protesting and try to get the facts right, then I think that what they're actually protesting for, they could actually, reach an agreement on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that at the core of most of these movements and organizations, it's always started with great intentions and a great mission and maybe even pure hearts and calm minds. But now we live in a day and age where, peaceful marchers and protesters might go out and they might actually have, a good plan and they're ready to march nonviolently. Maybe they have tried to negotiate with the other side, but then a bunch of people run out and in that cause. I think there's a lot of people that are not necessarily a part of the Black Lives Matter movement that just show up when there's a march. And a lot of times they're the ones that are doing all the dirt and not the organization itself. And I don't really have a dog in that hunt, or in that fight. I think if you're going to do it the right way, it's a free country. We have the right to assemble. We have freedom of speech. And if we do it the right way, we can change things. But I think one of the biggest problems, especially with the young generation coming up, is everybody wants everything fast and easy. It's the world of Amazon. Hey, I want it quick. I want it now. I want it cheap. And if you don't give it to me, I'll take it. And it's like, man, the world does not change like that. If you're not willing to, get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves, hit the streets and do it the right way, then stay out of the way, stay off the streets, let people that are really making a change do things. Looting. I mean, that's punk. Go out and loot in the middle of a protest. I mean, that's not King.
Yeah. Do you think that there's ever a role for? I mean, this sounds like a horrible question, but do you ever think there's a proper role for violent protests? It seems like historically, whenever movements have happened and been successful, there's a combination of both violent protests and peaceful. You look back at the American Revolution, that obviously got pretty violent. And in the 60s, there were the more radical individuals. Malcolm X, for example, started out as I think he got more peaceful towards the end there,
Correct.
but he was more radical. So there were these two different elements to a movement
Yeah.
that maybe both played a part in making it successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Malcolm's a good example of a guy that he got caught up in a sect of Islam, but never understood true Islam until he went to Mecca. And once he went to Mecca, he saw white brothers and sisters going around that rock as well and worshiping his God. It changed him. And he came back and he was different. And he began to preach a different message, which is why they ended up killing him. And the sad thing is he was set to meet with Dr. King 2 weeks from when he was killed. And, I mean, he was a martyr. It was a time for martyrs. And, the only time that violence brings about any kind of change is when the righteous suffer violence and arouse the conscience of a generation. And, from Jesus, nonviolent, Einstein, nonviolent, Gandhi, King, Mandela, Mother Teresa, nonviolent, Black Elk, nonviolent, the great names, the great human beings that this, planet has produced. The ones that stand the test of time were all nonviolent. Is there a time for war? Yeah, I leave that up to the government. I don't think every war is righteous necessarily,
Mhm.
but when we're talking about grassroots movements, whatever we resist, we strengthen. And that's in a confrontation, between a husband and a wife. If two sides are fighting and neither one is willing to back down and give in, doesn't mean give up your point. It means I'm not going to fight you. If you fight, you got nobody to fight. Then as long as two keep ramping up, it only makes whatever the situation is worse. Because if I give my enemy a reason to dig in and continue to be violent, then I've not only hurt myself, but I've hurt him. And so someone's got to give. And, Mandela is a perfect example. When he was in prison 27 years, the power shifted because the way he was being mistreated, first it started to mobilize his people, the Xhosa in South Africa, but then it was the whole bottom part of Africa, and then it spread through the world. There were people marching through the streets to free Mandela. They wrote songs about it, and his government tried to free him, and he would not be released. He said, until you dismantle apartheid, you keep me here. And so there's a man that chose to be imprisoned because he cared more about his country and his dream than his personal comfort. I mean, where are those people today is what I'd like to see. And when they finally let him free, they elected him president. And they thought, the world thought, that now that a black man was leading South Africa, that it was time to get revenge. And most people in South Africa wanted to lock up every white soul, and they wanted blood to run in the streets. And many thought that it was, that they deserved it. And Mandela did the unthinkable. He took, a white Afrikaans um, officer and put him in charge of his personal security detail. And so he entrusted his life to the white man after he had been imprisoned by the white man for 27 years. And he showed his nation what compassion and forgiveness looked like. And he wouldn't let anybody retaliate. And he brought that war torn Civil War country back together. And right now, it's an incredible land. I mean, I was there right after Mandela got elected, and it was too dangerous to go anywhere. And I went back 17 years later, and the transformation was unbelievable. And so, some people are going to say that, nah, I mean, it's a time for war. Well, nonviolent protest is a form, it's civil disobedience. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not going to give in to an evil system, but if you fight them, you're just giving them a reason to destroy you.
Yeah. Well, what? So you've mentioned before that you've taken these principles in this organization that started out as being focused on prisoners, and you've turned it around and actually used it on other populations as well. You've been able to incorporate it in some in school systems and some other settings. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful evolution because it was getting crazier and crazier out there, and to be honest, I don't know that I would have ever stopped. Like I'm like that, and it was getting more and more dangerous, and I was getting more. I mean, I was loving it, and just it was getting wilder and wilder, and that was putting a real strain on my family, on my marriage, not just the pace of the travel, but I was getting into some pretty dangerous situations, which caused my family a lot of worry and stress and anxiety. And I thought it was just going to be a prison peace movement for the rest of my life, and I was fine with that. And to be quite honest, I mean, I was willing to die for it. I mean, when you believe in something, again, I keep quoting the great ones, but Dr. King said, if a man doesn't have something he's willing to live, to die for, he's not fit to live. And so, there's a lot of people that have, a loud voice, maybe shouting in the street, but they don't have anything they believe in. Because if you ask them what's the solution, if you can't answer that, then shut up and go and study some before you get out there on the street again. And so as I go from prison to prison, the men kept telling me, when you gonna take it to the kids? Take it to the kids, because I found some of the greatest men I'll ever know, behind that razor wire, and some of the best friends I'll ever have. Somewhere out there that they'll never be heard and seen, but they're there. And I made a promise to them. I said, I'll never forget you. I'll try to come back and see you, but I'm going to do what you've been asking me to do, which is take this to the kids. And so every time I'd go to a new prison in a new state or, wherever I'd go, I would be asked to speak at the schools surrounding that prison. And I would tell them the story about these convicts and gangsters that were becoming peacemakers. And I'm telling you, you could hear a pin drop in auditoriums where the kids were out of control. When they heard it was gangster, they would be quiet and they would listen. And I found this amazing connection between these men on the inside that were changing and taking away excuses of the people in the free world. And when I went to the kids, man, it resonated with these kids because the young generation now is in a hip hop culture where a lot of it is sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the music, in the gaming, in the movies. So this already speaks their language, but it's a message of peace. And so, doors started closing to prisons that I could get in anytime I wanted. I mean, a warden would get shipped out and the new warden wouldn't let me in, or a state would cut its budget and I wouldn't have any funding, or I couldn't get into the prison in Tijuana, because of the elections had gone crazy down there and there was all kind of stuff. So it was like one thing after another. I was working hard to get into prisons and I just couldn't get in, and I didn't understand why. And all of a sudden, doors just started blowing wide open into schools. And so I went to work on a new book that I published about a year ago called Protect the Dream. And it's basically protect the dream. Obviously, I have a dream, that speech that changed the world. I took that and I built a program for young people, and it teaches them, how to dream, to have a big dream, to protect your dreams at all costs. And then having learned how to dream and protect your own dream, that we need to become dream protectors of the people in our schools. And so I launched it last summer. It went pretty well, but then I've been working over the last 12 months. And right now I'm doing it in about 10 schools this summer. And it's a competitive thing. I work with athletes and take them through 40-day character and leadership development programs and then commission them to be dream protectors in their school. And we're trying to put an end to bullying, drug and alcohol abuse, objectification, dropouts, gang activity, violence, disrespect of authorities, unhealthy relationships, just irresponsible social media, all the things that we know that are jamming our kids up. And it's becoming just as cool as the prison. When the Power Peace Project was coming to a new prison or one where it had been before, it was stupid, the demand. There'd be 1,200 men in a prison, 600 would sign up for the next round, which I couldn't handle that kind of demand. We're starting to see that in the schools, that when a school finds out that the Power Peace is coming, there's a lot of demand for this program, which I'm just incredibly grateful and blessed. But it's showing me that everybody wants peace, whether they know it or not. That's what they want.
Yeah. I think that there's there's definitely a lot of demand out there, and America's education system's lagging behind some of the more developed countries. And I think that that's a big part of it. Is there are some children that are just have these roots and poverty and poor backgrounds and are too influenced by gangs and drugs and all of that. And I think that once we can combat those problems, and we can actually solve some of these issues in the education systems, that's a really noble goal there, and a great mission. Tell me a little bit, where do you see the Power of Peace project in about 5, 10 years?
Well, one, you're asking great questions. Well done. Um, there's the cool thing about this is you don't have to have it all figured out. And whatever I tell young people, do not ever, ever, ever let somebody try to talk you out of what your dream is, what you love, and what you really want to do. Don't let anybody put you in a box, tell you got to be this or got to be that. Dream big dreams and do what you love, and then the rest just works itself out. The universe works that way. I believe it's basically responds to desire and intention. And so what started as a little, peace program for some, noble-hearted convicts that were tired of living in a place where you had to take a shank to the shower, that was the genesis of it. And then it continues to evolve. And I just keep kind of trying to follow it, keep up with it, because this is not, I just get to be a part of it. It's bigger than me. It's these beautiful kids, it's these convicts, it's these families in these tough neighborhoods. It's about them. But the latest development I couldn't have even planned. I started kicking around an idea where I thought, well, if pop builds bridges between, rivals, whether it be Crips and Bloods or whether it be racially, religiously, whatever, what if we started building bridges between cops and communities? Because what happened in Chicago, is indicative of what's going on in communities all over the country. And and so lately, what's happened here in Atlanta is I'm working with five after this week, five police departments here in the metro Atlanta area. And so the programs I'm doing in the schools with the athletes and teen leaders, we're bringing officers into the program we're having with the kids. And it's basically seek first to understand, find common ground, walk a mile, listen, communicate. And if there's something wrong, make it right and treat the other with dignity and respect. And so this past week we had an event where we took a bunch of our football players at one team, and then we got the local police department to join with us, and then we picked kind of a tough apartment complex here in the Atlanta area where there's some real needs. I mean, they've got some drama, some gang activity. The police have to be out there a good bit, and we went and served that community. It was a beautiful thing because you had young high school athletes, many of whom happened to be, brothers of color, most of them actually. And then this beautiful apartment complex where there's a lot of single family households. It's in a nice part of town, but it's a little more challenged economically. And then we had officers on site, probably a dozen officers that were there cooking the hot dogs and feeding the kids. And it was just this beautiful thing, where for a cool little minute, it wasn't cops against communities and everybody on high alert, the police are here. It was just, people, the guys and girls that happened to be wearing blue with a badge, they were serving the kids that happened to be, live in that community. And so the question you said 4 or 5 years, I believe this might be one of the powerful, kind of offshoots of this program, because we need a program that helps bring this divide together. I mean, the cops out there, they're just men and women that are just like you and me. They just chose that profession, and now they're just trying to go home at night. But then again, the kids that look a certain way aren't necessarily what you think they are. And that's one of the great, joys of my life is I've been embraced by communities that don't look like me. And I've gotten to spend time in homes and in cells and in, communities in third world where people that look like me don't get to spend time in homes of people that don't look like them. And I feel sorry for people because you miss out on one of the most beautiful things in the world. I mean, I've gotten to literally go in mosques and cathedrals and synagogues and ashrams and sweat lodge. And, this journey has taken me into places that most people that look like me don't get to go. And it's one of the most beautiful things of my life. So if my work and all these beautiful people that I get to work with, that make up the Power Peace Project, if when it's all said and done, it bridges and we've helped people come together that don't look like one another, don't come from the same place. And if we can just start to help officers see the young man of color in a different way than he did yesterday. And if we can help that kid see that officer different than he did yesterday, then we're moving in the right direction. And if we can do that, then really there's nobody that can't come together if we'll just sit down and break bread, eyeball to eyeball, get off the damn phone
Yeah.
and do life with somebody that doesn't look like you. You'll find out that we have much more in common than what separates us.
Yeah, I really respect that. I think that's an awesome and amazing mission. And I'm trying to contribute my part to that with this podcast. And the whole idea behind the podcast is to sit down with people and talk about what matters, hard conversations,
Yeah.
despite how controversial or hard they may be. And so I really like that aspect. I'm actually moving to Atlanta in a few weeks, and I'd love to be a part of that however I can.
Absolutely.
Well, so what what's a quick message? What matters most to you? What should people be talking about more than anything right now?
Well, one of the things that I think resonates, and I can kind of, leave you with this. I was, tonight, I had to bail for a minute, and we had this event at the Police Athletic League, and we had some of our kids over there graduating the pop program, and it was just a beautiful time. And I got to get with the little ones, and I taught them. I try to use kind of the common language of the day with young folks. Now, a couple of these are a little bit outdated, but I use them a lot. We do this thing where I say, they repeat after me, and I say, I see you. They say, I see you. I feel you. I feel you. I got you. I got you. And so we do that a lot. I see you. I feel you. I got you. And that's something we developed in the prisons. And, you hear that kind of lingo a lot. Somebody does something, you're like, I see you. It means I respect, I recognize, I see you. I see past what's on the outside, and I see the real you. It's really what people are saying when they say, I see you. And so I teach that to mean respect. Okay. So tonight I got to look into your world and see how you do your podcast, listen to your questions, see that you did your research. And so at the end of our time together, I can say, Stephen, I see you, man. Like I see you. Like this is a gift, right? Run with it. This is good. But you're acknowledging somebody, and really deep down, can you find the God in somebody else? Whatever that word means to you. Now, take all the religious baggage off. I did work on death row in Alabama and Louisiana, and people are like, man, how can you do that? Because these are the guys that did the worst of the worst. They're infamous, and many see them as evil, and they did horrible things, which I don't have to focus on that. What I do is I go in and I try to find the God in everybody that I meet. And what that does is, one, people tend to be pretty cool with me because I'm looking for God in them. It's hard to hate somebody that's trying to find the divinity in you, but it's a way that we can come together. And so that's what I mean when I say I see you. The second one is I feel you. And that's something that you do hear a lot of. It's like, we'll be talking, hey, Stephen, we're going to do this message. You feel me? And we're going to go at 8 o'clock. Is that, you feel me? And you know what I'm saying? People are like, you feel me? You feel me? You feel me? And what we're saying there, and this is what I teach, is I feel you means that I have compassion. I not only see you and recognize the divinity in you, but I also feel you. Once I see you, I start to feel your pain, your joy, your hopes, your fears, your dreams. And so if we can get close enough to see somebody, and I'm telling you, when you've seen a black militant Muslim hug a neo-Nazi skinhead in a prison, then you believe in miracles.
Yeah.
And it all came down to, I see you. And now we've sat down 8 weeks in a row, and we've had good talks, and we've broken bread together. I feel you. I realize that you have pain, that you have family, that you've lost things, that you still have dreams. And it's hard to hate somebody up close. Typically that happens at a distance. And then the last piece is, I got you. Okay. When somebody says, I got you, man, basically what they're saying is, I got you back. I teach that as being loyal. That's loyalty. So I see you as respect. I feel you as compassion. I got you as loyalty. Because once I see you, if it's like, Stephen, man, I see you and I've gotten close enough, I feel you, man. I mean, I feel what your dreams, your hopes, whatever it is. Now I can say, I got you. Because if somebody came along and said, man, that guy Stephen, da, this and that, I'd go, oh, man, whoa, do you know the brother? Have you spent time with him? Because I got nothing but love for him. You see what I'm saying? Now all of a sudden I've got your back because we got close enough. And I think that that's the way we're going to heal this country, is we got to sit down, eyeball to eyeball, and we've got to communicate. And if we get close enough to do that, it's hard to hate somebody. You don't have to agree with them. And that's what I saw. It's like, the Nazis went back to being Nazis. And, the militant brothers of color went back to doing their thing. But when they saw each other in the yard, it was kind of that little nod, like, what's up, man? I mean, I'm not going to hate you anymore, but I ain't going to hang with you. Well, that's fine. I mean, we've mended a wound there, and those are two guys that aren't going to be stabbing each other tonight. So I don't know if that's what you were asking for, but
Yeah,
that's my little.
yeah. I mean, you have such an incredible story and an inspirational message there, and it's really great to hear that. Tell people how they can find out more about Pop and you.
Okay. Um, you can, I mean, nowadays just Google Google anything. But I mean, the easiest way to find me is powerofpeaceproject.com. Powerofpeaceproject.com. You can go to Amazon. I've got several books that you can find out. Peace Behind the Wire is probably the one that is the best one to really understand the pop story and how this movement came to be. And then the latest one is Protect the Dream, and that's the one that I'm doing the most work around now in high schools, and we're starting to get into some middle schools as well. But you can contact us through the website, or I mean, I'm easy to find. So anybody out there that's interested, just reach out to us, and we'll try to bring it to your community.
Well, Kit, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I'm looking forward to meeting you in Atlanta sometime soon.
Me too. You have to come by the office and check us out.
That'd be great. All right, well, you have a good one.
Yeah, keep up the good work, young brother. You're doing great.